I sat in my car outside Lunaris Biotech at 5:45 a.m., my fingers shaking as I sealed the thick beige envelope. On the front, in my neat handwriting, it read, Board of Trustees, confidential and immediate. Inside was an 8-page analysis that could either rescue the company or end my future. 11 meetings. That's how many times CEO Adrian Kessler had shut me down whenever I tried to raise concerns about suspicious financial activity. 11 times he stared me directly in the eye and delivered the same humiliating dismissal that still made my chest tighten with anger. Just 3 months earlier, my life at Lunaris Biotech had been perfect. My name is Mira, and at 29, I had just been promoted from junior financial analyst to senior analyst after only 18 months at the company. Lunaris wasn't just another corporation. It was a privately built biomedical institute known for creating treatments for extremely rare genetic illnesses. For 4 generations, the Kessler family had built their brand on compassion and scientific excellence. My office was on the 4th floor, looking straight into the glass-walled research campus where brilliant scientists worked day and night discovering therapies that families all over the world were desperately waiting for. Every morning, I watched researchers in pale blue coats moving rapidly between buildings, carrying samples that represented hope for people who had run out of options. This job meant something to me, far more than my previous position at a mundane accounting agency. But during one of my routine quarterly audits, something jumped out at me. While reviewing R&D expenses, I noticed strange patterns in payments to a consulting vendor called Nova Strategic Consultants. The total was an alarming $2,780,000 over just 5 months. But there were no reports, no research papers, no emails, absolutely nothing showing what work they supposedly performed. Yes, the invoices looked polished, clean formatting, proper headers, detailed line items, but the descriptions were vague. Regulatory alignment review, specialized biotech advisement, etc. For that much money, there should have been mountains of documentation. Instead, silence. At the next department leadership meeting, I brought it up. CEO Adrian Kessler, then 46, led every meeting personally. He came from a prestigious European business school and had a reputation for aggressively expanding market presence. I had prepared charts, timelines, it notes everything. When I started explaining the inconsistencies, he cut me off before I reached the 3rd sentence. We don't need your commentary on high-level partnerships, Mira. Stick to basic accounting. The room fell dead silent. Danica Holt, my director, wouldn't look at me. Evan Park, our IT head and one of my closest friends at work, shifted uncomfortably. Marla Quinn from HR continued writing as if nothing was happening. I tried again, insisting the amounts were too large to ignore. Again, he interrupted, sharper this time. It's not your place to question executive vendor decisions. Move to the summary. The humiliation was burning, but something about his reaction felt wrong. It wasn't annoyed, it was afraid. Later that day, I passed his half-open office door and heard him whisper urgently on the phone. Spread the transfers out next quarter. This new analyst is poking around. We can't risk attention on those accounts. My blood went cold. Transfers, not consulting services. That night, I stayed late and cross-checked everything. Payment logs, project codes, internal communications. What I found was worse than I imagined. Nova Strategic Consultants had no real office, only a mailbox in Ontario, a 1-page website with stock photos, no employee records, no documented work. The listed CEO was Harold Vega, a name I didn't recognize until I checked internal HR emergency contacts. He was Adrian Kessler's cousin. Over the next 5 weeks, I attempted speaking up in 3 more major meetings. Each time, Adrian shut me down harsher than before. Then, during a break room encounter, Evan discreetly warned me, Watch yourself, Mira. People have been fired for less. Kessler doesn't tolerate being questioned. The pressure at work tightened around me. Danica slowly cut me out of planning emails. Colleagues avoided me. HR scheduled performance concern discussions. At home, even Leo, my boyfriend of 4 years, struggled to understand. Maybe it's just complicated accounting, he said one night while I had financial files spread across the dining table. Not everything suspicious is corruption, but I knew what I had seen, and then came the worst discovery. Nova wasn't the only fake vendor. A second shell company, Regulus Compliance Partners, had received $1,950,000 over the same period. Same structure, same lack of documentation. Same owner, Harold Vega. Each invoice was just under $60,000, conveniently below the board approval threshold. When I compared financials across the last 3 years, I found the fraudulent payments had started exactly when Adrian became CEO. Before that, under his grandfather, vendor expenses had been minimal and well documented. This wasn't sloppy accounting. This was deliberate embezzlement totaling over $7 million. Meanwhile, researchers were struggling. Lunaris had received $13 million in government grants and private donations over the last 2 years, specifically for rare pediatric disorders, but programs were consistently underfunded. Now I understood why. Children suffering from life-threatening illnesses were being denied research funding because the CEO was funneling money to shell companies owned by his cousin. Every meeting after that grew more hostile. By the 7th meeting, he openly threatened my job. If you can't stay within your role, maybe this isn't the right place for you. My personal and professional life were collapsing. But that night, sitting in my dim office surrounded by evidence, I made a choice. I wouldn't stay silent. Not when children's lives, research integrity, and the future of the company depended on exposing the truth. You're changing into someone I don't recognize. His words cut deeper than ever because they echoed the dismissive attitude of Adrian Kessler toward my concerns. Even the person who was supposed to support me unconditionally, my boyfriend Leo, questioned my judgment, suggesting I was seeing problems where none existed. But I couldn't abandon the investigation, especially after uncovering the link to pediatric research funding. Too many children's lives depended on Lunaris Biotech's programs, and Adrian's embezzlement was directly sabotaging their chance at life-saving treatments. Evan Park became my only ally, though he had to be cautious about showing support publicly. During our whispered conversations in empty hallways or the deserted parking lot, he shared his observations about Adrian's growing aggression toward anyone asking difficult questions. He's been getting calls that visibly agitate him, Evan confided, and he's been working late hours on financial records he manages personally, bypassing accounting entirely. Evan's technical skills allowed him to monitor company emails, and he noticed Adrian communicating with outside contacts via encrypted services instead of company servers. He couldn't see the contents, but the secrecy suggested Adrian was coordinating activities he wanted completely off the books. The most disturbing discovery came when I dug into Adrian's professional history and family ties. Public records revealed that Harold Vega, owner of both shell companies, had been involved in financial irregularities at 2 other firms where Adrian had executive control. This wasn't his first time orchestrating embezzlement. He had honed his schemes over multiple companies, systematically using family-owned shell firms to siphon corporate funds without triggering oversight. Even more alarming, I learned Adrian was planning to sell Lunaris Biotech to a major pharmaceutical corporation. Recent filings suggested a preliminary valuation of nearly $520 million. If he succeeded, he would walk away with millions stolen from research funding. leaving the acquirer and Lunaris's scientists with a financial disaster. The timeline was critical. Adrian needed to complete the embezzlement and finalize the sale before a proper audit. It could uncover missing funds. My questions about the consulting payments threatened to derail his exit plan. Late one evening, as I reviewed all my findings, I realized that conventional reporting channels were completely compromised. Adrian controlled the executive team. Danica Holt was either complicit or intimidated. HR reported directly to him. The only independent authorities capable of acting were the board of directors. Reaching out to the board directly would be unprecedented and likely end my career at Lunaris, even if my allegations were correct. Whistleblowing at this level was a massive personal risk, particularly against a CEO as well, connected and influential as Adrian. The choice was clear in theory but terrifying in practice. Remain silent and allow the theft of research funds, or risk everything to expose a crime that endangered children's lives. Looking out my office window at the research campus, I knew there was no alternative. I had to act. The 8th meeting confirmed that normal channels were useless. During the monthly departmental review, Adrian preemptively humiliated me in front of senior staff. Should junior analysts be dictating company policy? His voice dripped with sarcasm as he singled me out, mocking my 2 years of experience. Several colleagues laughed nervously, signaling loyalty while avoiding becoming the next target. Their laughter felt like blows, the fear in their eyes unmistakable. I sat frozen, my cheeks burning, while Adrian continued his tirade about organizational boundaries. The meeting dragged on another 45 minutes, but all I could think of were the children being denied vital treatment because of this corruption. The 9th meeting, 3 days later, was during quarterly planning. I hadn't intended to speak, knowing the futility of raising concerns through official channels. But when Adrian asked about resource allocation, I couldn't remain silent. Sir, I have concerns about documentation for consulting payments and the need for stricter vendor oversight. Adrian's expression instantly shifted from composure to barely contained rage. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the gravity of what they were witnessing. Mira, he said, low and menacing, you're disrupting team dynamics with persistent insubordination. Consider this your final warning. Exceed your authority again, and face immediate termination. I left the room alive but shaken. That night, I resolved to go directly to the board, bypassing Adrian entirely. It was a nuclear option, career ending if I failed, but morally unavoidable. For the next 3 weeks, I worked tirelessly late nights and weekends, documenting every fraudulent payment, tracing shell company ownership, and calculating the precise impact on research funding. The evidence showed that Adrian's theft extended beyond embezzlement. By draining federally regulated grant funds, he was committing federal crimes. The Pediatric Epilepsy Research Program, a groundbreaking initiative, had been delayed by 18 months due to budget shortfalls caused by Adrian. I unearthed heartbreaking stories of children who were suffering while their medication development stalled. The experimental drug had the potential to eliminate seizures in over 70% of patients who previously experienced multiple daily episodes. But the program was operating on just 60% of its intended budget, equipment purchases delayed, clinical trials reduced, staff layoffs, all because millions were funneled into shell companies. The personal toll was immense. Leo and I fought. He moved out, leaving me alone with boxes of financial files and overwhelming responsibility. My family expressed concerns about my judgment and career, but I couldn't abandon these children. Every delayed day meant more suffering. I drafted a 7-page report detailing every aspect of Adrian's fraud. bank and routing numbers, shell company, ownership records, timelines of payments, calculations showing direct impacts on research funding. The report also highlighted the pediatric epilepsy program, emphasizing how the theft delayed life-saving treatments. I rewrote it 3 times to ensure clarity, accuracy, and airtight evidence, aware that Adrian could hire lawyers to discredit me. The night before mailing, Evan Park sent me an email confirming Adrian's urgency. He had accelerated the company sale from 6 months to 30 days, desperate to escape before the next board meeting, where missing funds would be discovered. I realized the timing was perilous. Adrian was at his most vulnerable and most dangerous. If the sale succeeded, he would vanish with millions in stolen research funding, leaving the company and its scientists in ruin. That night, sitting in my apartment surrounded by evidence, I understood the gravity of what I faced. Tomorrow, I would mail certified letters to all 5 board members, forcing them to act. The gamble was immense. Either save Lunaris Biotech's research programs or end my career in spectacular failure. But I couldn't remain silent. Some stakes were higher than personal safety, and protecting children from the consequences of corporate fraud was one of them. The next morning, I drove to the post office and mailed my reports. Within days, Adrian would learn that someone had documented his systematic theft and alerted the only people capable of stopping him. There was no turning back. 3 days later, Adrian stormed into the office, barely concealing his panic. Margaret Foster, board chair, had called an emergency session. He didn't know I was the source yet, but he suspected. During the staff meeting, he instituted new rules requiring pre-approval for all external communications and threatened immediate termination for any breach. Later, he called me into his office, Patricia Novick as witness, seething. Someone has been spreading false allegations. If I discover who, they will face serious legal consequences. I maintained eye contact, my heart racing. Adrian was dangerous, panicked, cornered, and capable of anything. Cornered executives with millions at stake were capable of extreme measures to protect their criminal enterprises. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Mira? Adrian leaned forward across his desk, eyes intense. I understand you're concerned about allegations. I replied carefully, but I don't understand why you're discussing this with me specifically. Adrian's gaze narrowed, but he couldn't accuse me outright without admitting the claims might be valid. We stared at each other for several tense seconds before Patricia Novick intervened to schedule a formal performance review for the following week. As I left Adrian's office, I felt a mixture of fear and vindication. His visible panic confirmed that my report had achieved its purpose. The board was taking the allegations seriously. But I also realized I was now in genuine physical danger. Adrian had too much to lose to allow a junior analyst to dismantle his carefully planned scheme. If he could discredit or eliminate me as a threat, he might still salvage his criminal enterprise. That evening, Evan Park approached me in the parking garage. He glanced around nervously and spoke in a low voice. I've been monitoring email traffic like you asked. Adrian's been contacting lawyers about employee termination procedures and non-disclosure agreements. He's also researching background investigation services. His information confirmed my worst fears. Adrian was preparing a comprehensive attack on my credibility, gathering ammunition to destroy me. Executives with his resources could make life unbearable for anyone who threatened their operations. There's something else, Evan continued. I copied all the suspicious emails before Adrian could delete them. If anything happens to you, there's proof he was trying to cover up the irregularities you uncovered. Having Evan preserve this evidence gave me hope. Even if Adrian tried to ruin me, the trail he left behind would make it impossible for him to claim innocence. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Danica Holt, my finance director, requested a private meeting. I expected another reprimand about performance, but instead she whispered, "I know what you discovered. I've been aware of these consulting payments for months, but Adrian threatened to ruin my career if I ever spoke up." Her admission stunned me. She had been complicit, not from greed, but fear. As a single mother supporting 3 children, she couldn't risk confronting a powerful CEO. "I've been documenting everything," Danica said, pulling a thick folder from a locked drawer. Invoice approvals, emails ordering me to process payments without documentation, and records of meetings where he told me to ignore oversight procedures. The folder detailed how Adrian had dismantled financial controls and intimidated employees into facilitating fraudulent payments. His crimes weren't impulsive, they were systematic and meticulously planned. "Why show me this now?" I asked. "Margaret Foster called me yesterday," she replied. "The board is investigating and interviewing everyone in finance. I can't pretend I don't know anymore." Danica's cooperation was a turning point. As finance director, she could not be dismissed as a disgruntled employee. Her testimony would devastate Adrian's defense. Within hours, the investigation accelerated. Margaret Foster scheduled interviews with the entire finance and accounting teams and brought in external forensic accountants to audit Lunaris Biotech's vendor relationships. Adrian's response was swift and vicious. He called an emergency staff meeting, warning that employees under investigation could face legal consequences for violating confidentiality or engaging in corporate sabotage. Though he didn't name names, everyone understood the threat: cooperate with the board and face retaliation. 2 days later, the forensic accountants delivered their preliminary analysis. They had traced the shell company payments through multiple accounts and discovered Adrian had already moved $3,400,000 to offshore accounts in preparation for his escape. Even more damning, he had accelerated the transfers immediately after learning about the board's investigation. His frantic actions proved both guilt and intent. That evening, Margaret Foster called me personally to an emergency meeting. Driving to her downtown office, I realized my 7-page report had triggered an investigation moving faster than Adrian could react. The evidence was overwhelming: financial damage documented, multiple witnesses cooperating, and Adrian scrambling. But he still had one last card. If he could discredit me as unstable or dishonest, he might create enough confusion to evade prosecution. Executives facing federal crimes often resorted to extreme measures to avoid accountability. Margaret Foster's office occupied the top floor of a sleek high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. At 62, she commanded respect across the pharmaceutical industry, having built and sold 3 successful biotech companies. Her reputation for integrity made her the ideal board chair during this crisis. "Your report was extraordinarily thorough," Margaret began. "But I need to understand exactly how a senior financial analyst discovered such an elaborate scheme when our external auditors missed it." I explained step by step, from noticing unexplained consulting payments to uncovering Adrian's shell companies. Margaret listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed her expertise in corporate fraud. "The forensic accountants have confirmed your findings," she continued. "Adrian Kessler has stolen $6,700,000. Over the past 2 years, Adrian Kessler had siphoned millions through 4 separate shell companies, but the damage went far beyond embezzlement." Margaret Foster opened a thick folder containing the forensic team's preliminary report. The numbers were staggering, and the human cost even more so. Adrian had systematically drained funding from 3 critical research programs, not just the pediatric epilepsy study I had focused on, a breakthrough therapy for rare genetic disorders affecting infants had been delayed indefinitely due to budget shortfalls. A revolutionary treatment for aggressive childhood leukemia had been abandoned after 2 years because research funding mysteriously disappeared. A promising therapy for pediatric brain tumors had been shelved when federal grants couldn't be matched with required corporate funding. These programs could have saved hundreds of lives, Margaret said quietly. Adrian wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing hope from families facing devastating diagnoses. The board acted swiftly. Within 48 hours of receiving my report, Adrian was suspended. All company accounts were frozen, and federal authorities were notified of potential securities fraud. But Adrian did not accept defeat quietly. He hired a team of expensive criminal defense attorneys and began attacking the credibility of everyone involved in exposing his crimes, claiming I was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. His lawyers argue you fabricated evidence to frame him, Margaret explained. But with Danica Holt's documentation and Evan Park's preserved emails, there's no way to sustain that defense. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Margaret revealed that federal authorities had been monitoring Adrian for months as part of a broader investigation into pharmaceutical industry fraud. My report provided the specific evidence they needed to move forward with federal charges. Adrian's criminal enterprise extended far beyond Lunaris Biotech. Investigators identified similar shell company schemes at 2 previous companies where he had held executive positions. During depositions, Marcus Williams, Adrian's brother, and Locke confessed to orchestrating the shell company scheme in exchange for reduced charges. He revealed that Adrian had planned to abandon the company entirely after a sale, leaving employees without jobs and research programs without funding. Adrian had specifically targeted pediatric research grants because he believed hospitals lacked the oversight to catch him. The cold calculation of targeting children's research made his crimes all the more reprehensible. Federal prosecutors treated crimes against children with particular seriousness, and juries responded emotionally to evidence showing that corporate executives had stolen money meant to save lives. Margaret assumed the role of interim CEO and immediately implemented sweeping reforms, restored full funding to all compromised research programs, established independent oversight and auditing for every vendor relationship, created anonymous reporting channels for employees who discovered irregularities. The pediatric epilepsy study resumed, clinical trials expanded, and children who had been waiting for treatment finally received care. Employee morale soared as the atmosphere of fear and intimidation evaporated. My efforts were officially recognized when Margaret offered me the newly created position of Director of Financial Integrity. Your willingness to risk everything to protect vulnerable patients exemplifies the values this company was founded on, she told me. The position carried authority to investigate irregularities and prevent future fraud. My salary doubled, and I received stock options worth $200,000. The most satisfying moment came when federal authorities arrested Adrian at his downtown office as he prepared to flee the country. Airline tickets to Switzerland and evidence of further offshore transfers were found. His escape had been thwarted, and he faced federal charges for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Eventually, Adrian received 7 years in prison and was ordered to pay $12,400,000 in restitution. Marcus Williams received 3 years and was permanently banned from corporate consulting. Under Margaret's permanent leadership as CEO, Lunaris Biotech became a model of ethical research and financial transparency. Comprehensive oversight systems were implemented. Every vendor relationship required documentation and verification, and employees were empowered to report concerns safely. My new role extended beyond monitoring finances. I became an advocate for ethical practices, guiding employees to identify potential irregularities. I was also invited to testify before Congress on the need for stronger whistleblower protections in the pharmaceutical industry, contributing to federal reforms that now protect research programs from corporate fraud. The real victory, however, was human. Letters from families whose children benefited from properly funded research poured in. 7-year-old Isabella Martinez, one of the first children to receive the pediatric epilepsy treatment, had been seizure-free for over 2 years. Her parents wrote, "You gave our little girl a future filled with possibilities. Thank you for ensuring the research funding remained available." Isabella's story represented hundreds of similar cases where children received life-saving treatments because research funding was protected from corporate theft. 6 months later, watching Adrian escorted into the federal courthouse for sentencing, I reflected on the journey that began with routine financial reconciliation and ended with systemic industry reform. Corporate fraud had been defeated not by silence, but by courage. 2 years after Adrian's sentencing, I established the Lunaris Foundation for Ethical Research Practices, a scholarship program for young women pursuing careers in financial oversight and corporate governance. Isabella, now 9, was the guest speaker at the foundation's inaugural ceremony, reminding everyone that corporate integrity has profound human consequences. "I get to go to school and play with friends because brave people made sure my medicine was developed correctly," she said. I told the scholarship recipients, "Corporate fraud thrives in silence and dies in sunlight. Your willingness to ask inconvenient questions and challenge powerful people will protect countless individuals who cannot protect themselves." The journey demonstrated that integrity, courage, and systemic reform could triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. Honest people can change corporate culture, hold criminals accountable, and protect vulnerable patients, sometimes at great personal risk. But the result is lasting, meaningful impact.